Hey everybody, it's Kelly. Welcome back to another episode of Ask a Therapist. I get asked this question a lot, and I'm finally going to answer it today. Why do queer people hate the church? Before we really get into the meat of that, I would like to ask you to go ahead and subscribe, to hit the like and hit the bell to make sure you get notifications. Comment in response to the things that you've heard today. I would love to hear your input on this topic. Number one, you can't lump all queer people together. Number two, there's not a whole lot of reason for queer people to love institutional religion at this point. Number three, for years the church has been guilty of covering up egregious wrongs by their leaders. Not only that, but the church has also been guilty forever of explaining to women specifically that their roles are lined up for them and their value is in what's between their legs and how they contribute to their household and their husband. None of the language the church has used for years has reflected that it's even an option for people to not be straight, cisgender. It is beyond my scope of understanding to be able to justify some of those decisions, except that self-preservation has become the goal of the church. With the readily available amount of information that we all have to do our own research into what led the church to be this way and what led it to be so anti-gay and anti-anybody who's not cishet, it is ridiculous to assume that we would not at this point actually come to realize that the words that are being used and the arguments that are being used that are against people in the queer community are based on falsehoods. The problematic principle in much of this at this point is that the assumption is that God equals church. One of the arguments that those in the conservative Christian community use that are against those in the queer community is that the church has taught for thousands of years, sometimes they say hundreds of years, honestly, it doesn't matter. The church has taught for this many years
that certain things are okay and certain things are not. I believe in the inerrancy of scripture, and so this must be true.
To people in that stance, I say, if you look another human being in the face, a human being who is telling you, I know who I am and I know how I was born and I know who I want to be. If you are looking another human being in the face who is saying that to you and your response is, well, the church has taught this for this many years, so you are wrong. And you are not made that way. If that is your response to another human being, your God is not the God you think you're worshiping. Your God is the church. Your God is the historical church. Here's another litmus test. Look around you in your context and tell me who those in power are oppressing. Now understand, this only works if you're not one of those people who has imagined you're being oppressed by, say a denomination that no longer supports your underhanded works. If those being oppressed, ignored, or marginalized, if those people who are getting that treatment from those in power are also the same people who are not served by your faith community, you are not doing your job as a Christian. Oh boy, am I gonna get comments on these. The fact is, there's a lot of people out there who have stories very similar to mine, who grew up in a Christian environment, who were in church every time the doors opened. I knew I wanted to be in ministry from the time I was in 11th grade. I entered into this whole different world in 11th grade of leadership and hierarchy and conversation and calling, and got very swept up in the idea that I was chosen and that I was unique and I was special. And because of that, developed some really regretful and in some ways still fairly traumatic situations with adults in my life. And the adults in my life thought they were doing the right thing and saying the right thing and having the right conversations with me because they were concerned for my soul. They were never concerned for me. They were concerned for the soul that they imagined I had that was dying and withering inside my queer little body. As a therapist, I can reassign the blame in those situations, and I can understand that those adults in my life, and even those other young adults in my life by the time I got to college, I can imagine that they thought that their hearts were in the right place. I can imagine that they were merely repeating the things that they had always been told. Here's the difference. I stepped out and re-understood the things that I had always been told in the lens of my own value and my own queerness, because I had the ability to do that. Not everyone has the ability to do that, and not everybody has the desire to do that. I was still clinging to this idea that I was special and chosen and called for a certain thing. That's what prompted me to figure out how to mesh these two worlds together. For most people, that's not a thing. They're not singled out and made a big deal out of, and there's not like a spectacle, and they're just teenagers, and they're living their lives in a community that makes them feel alive and seen, and then one day they tell people the truth of who they are, and they have to leave. Because if they choose to continue to live in sin, well then, they're sinners, and they can't be in leadership, and they can't be in fellowship, and they can't be in anymore. You get how gross that is, right? You get how contrary to the God that you say you follow that actually is, right? The only justification the church as a whole has ever really given to those in the queer community is that they expect you to be repenting of your sin and working to live outside of it, working through it, working to leave it behind you. But the thing is, within the church, the queer community is the only community that's expected of. Growing up, I had a pastor repeatedly cheated on his wife. He was out of the pulpit for a year. He was suspended for a year. He didn't make amends. We have a woman in this denomination out west who was called and ordained and brought people to Christ and did all the things that you're supposed to do as a leader in a church, and by a group of her peers was promoted to one of the highest offices in this particular denomination. She was gay and married to her partner, and because of that she got death threats because she was honest about who she was. Do you know who watched that happen? Me. I watched it happen. Friends of mine watched it happen. People younger than me watched it happen and watched the church do nothing. When you have to ask why a group dislikes you, you've already made assumptions about what it is. You've already made assumptions about what the answer is going to be, and you've already made assumptions about them. My dear, dear queer friends, understand that the church, big C church, is wrong. I don't care if you believe in a higher power. I don't care if you believe that the world was created in exactly 7 days, or you believe that it happened over eons. I don't care if you think we all came from a speck of dust. It doesn't matter to me what you feel is our origin story. What matters to me is your story as you understand it. Yes, some queer people hate the church with a lot of good reason. To the queer people out there who grew up in the church and were part of maybe a youth group or a children's ministry, who saw all the tiny little microaggressions towards the queer community, whether you understood who you were or not, and decided that your relationship and your love for these people was bigger than their hatred of who you might be, you were not making the wrong decisions. You were making the best decisions you could with what you had. For those of us who endured religious trauma at the hands of anyone who was supposed to be in charge of us, for those of you who endured religious trauma at the hands of the people that were supposed to be caring for you and watching out for you, please understand this. It was not your fault. You did not ask to be victimized by people. You did not ask to be abused by those in power. You did not ask to have your validity questioned all of the time in random Facebook and Twitter comments by people who've never honestly had a conversation with a queer person. You did not ever ask for that, and it is not your fault, and it is not yours to carry. If I can say anything to you, it would be this: give yourself permission to lay down the burdens you were never meant to hold. It is unrealistic to expect people to continue to attend to conversations with patience and interest, even when those conversations devolve into debating your humanity. You do not have to take that, and I hope that you don't. The sheer force of will that is required to, as a teenager, as a young adult, even as a fully developed adult, the amount of energy that it takes to look back at some of the messages you've been given by leadership in your life that have said that there is something inherently wrong with you because you don't act or look or behave like them. The sheer amount of energy that takes is astounding, let alone the fact that you're doing that in the midst of a world that is set on believing there is something inherently wrong about you. About a year ago now, I left my ministry situation, and I left for a lot of reasons. Not the least of them is the fact that it became clear that I was never going to be accepted and loved the way that I accepted and loved my coworkers and the people I thought to be my friends at that place. It was never going to happen because they believed in their heart of hearts that there was something less than about my marriage. There was something less sanctified, less holy, less valid about my love because of who I knew myself to be. I have not finished figuring out what that means for me. And it's a year later. So it's not okay. It's not okay the way that religion has treated those in the queer community, whether they were believers or not. It's not okay. That's it for today. Thank you so much for being here. Don't forget to comment, subscribe, like the video, share it with your friends, and I will see you again next week. Until then, take care of yourselves and each other.